The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the living room, casting a golden glow on the polished floors of Sandra's mansion in Lekki. But despite the beauty of the surroundings, an oppressive silence hung in the air, thicker than the Lagos humidity. Sandra, perched on the edge of a plush sofa, gazed out at the palm trees swaying gently in the breeze. It was a picturesque view, one that would have made anyone else envious. But for Sandra, it was a reminder of the life she had trapped herself in. The mansion, with its extravagant chandeliers, expensive furniture, and rooms that seemed to stretch on forever, felt more like a gilded cage than a sanctuary. It should have been a dream come true, an epitome of luxury and success. Yet, inside, Sandra's heart was heavy. Her eyes wandered over the paintings on the walls, the fine china in the glass cabinet, and the crystal vases holding fresh flowers. All these things, beautiful as they were, could never fill the void inside her. She remembered a time when life had been simple, when love had been all that mattered, and material things had no bearing on her happiness. That was before she had met Tony. Tony, the wealthy businessman who had swept her off her feet with promises of a life of comfort and abundance. He had been everything she thought she needed. But Tony, for all his wealth, was a man of cold ambition, and his love or lack thereof was the price Sandra had paid for her mother's obsession with status. "You cannot marry a poor man, Sandra," her mother had told her, her words sharp and commanding like the merciless Lagos sun. "Tony has money. He will give you the world. Do you think Andy can offer you that?" It was a conversation that had repeated in her mind 1,000 times. She had loved Andy. His heart had been warm, his smile genuine. He had been her world, the man from a humble village in Oyo who didn't care for wealth, only for love. But her mother could not see past his modest background. She had insisted that Sandra marry Tony, and in her moment of weakness, Sandra had agreed. The months following the wedding had been a blur. Tony's business ventures kept him busy, and their once happy home felt increasingly empty. Sandra spent most of her days alone, wandering from one empty room to the next, always finding herself in a space that never truly felt like hers. Tony would come home late at night, his suit still sharp, his demeanor distant. He never asked about her day. He never cared to hear about the loneliness that ate at her insides. His love was something she had read about in books, something she had once dreamt about, never something she had known in reality. At first, it was easy to pretend, to wear the smile of a woman who had everything. But the longer she lived in the house, the more suffocating it became. She missed the simplicity of life, the quiet days spent by the river with Andy, the shared laughter, the feeling that love was the most important thing in the world. Here, in this house, money was the only thing that mattered, and Sandra was beginning to realize the high price she had paid. It started with small things, the cold remarks, the way Tony would dismiss her opinions as if they didn't matter. But soon, those small things escalated. The gentle barbs became sharp and cutting, and the moments when Tony would raise his voice became more frequent. He had stopped looking at her with affection, and instead saw her as a possession, an object to flaunt to the world, a symbol of his success. One evening, it reached a boiling point. Sandra had asked Tony if she could visit her family in Oyo. Her mother had called, and she missed the familiar sights and sounds of the village, her roots. But Tony's response was anything but understanding. "Why do you always want to go back there?" Tony snapped, his voice laced with annoyance. "Don't you see the life I'm giving you? What do they have to offer that I don't?" Sandra had been taken aback. She had expected a different response, a gentler one. After all, it wasn't a request for anything extravagant. She wasn't asking for a new car or a designer handbag. She simply wanted to reconnect with her family, her roots. But Tony, in his ever-growing arrogance, saw no value in her desire. To him, nothing outside his world of business and luxury mattered. But Sandra didn't back down. I just want to see my family, Tony. Just for a few days. It's important to me. Important? Tony scoffed, stepping closer to her. You should be grateful for everything I've given you. You think your family can give you what I have? What are you even looking for in that place? They have nothing. The words stung. Sandra felt her heart tighten. She had hoped for a softer approach, but Tony's words felt like a slap. Before she could respond, his anger flared again. In a sudden, violent outburst, he shoved her against the coffee table. The sharp corner of the table dug into her stomach, and Sandra gasped in pain. "Tony, please," she cried, clutching her abdomen. The pain was immediate and overwhelming. Her breath caught in her throat as she sank to the floor. Her eyes filled with terror. But Tony was unfazed. He didn't see the fear in her eyes. His anger clouded everything else, drowning out the momentary connection that had once existed between them. As Sandra curled on the floor, clutching her belly, the reality of her situation hit her like a freight train. This was the man she had chosen over Andy. This was the life she had decided to live. And for what? The rich house, the expensive car, the clothes, the jewelry. None of it mattered. None of it could bring her the warmth that she had lost. In that moment, with tears streaming down her face, Sandra realized the true price of wealth. The child she carried, her unborn baby, was her only connection to the love she had once known. It was the only part of her life that still held meaning, but even that felt uncertain now, threatened by the violent man who had become a stranger to her. As the tears continued to fall, Sandra thought of Andy, the man who had never cared about her wealth, who had loved her with a purity that seemed impossible now. She wondered if he ever thought of her. Would he have been able to protect her from this life? Would he have ever treated her like this? In that moment, the mansion, the wealth, the success, it all felt meaningless. The life she had built with Tony felt like a lie. And as the pain in her stomach intensified, Sandra's heart broke for the life she could never have, the life where love had been enough. The morning sun had risen over Lagos, casting its harsh light on the crowded streets. The market stalls were already brimming with fresh produce, yams piled high, plantains hanging in bunches, and fish still fresh from the ocean, their silver scales shimmering in the heat. The city, with its blend of chaos and vibrancy, moved on without a care for the tragedy unfolding inside the Lagos University Teaching Hospital, LUTH. In the sterile waiting area, the air was thick with the smell of antiseptic, mixed with the faint scent of sweat that clung to the bodies of the hospital's visitors. Nurses hurried down the corridors, their white uniforms making them look like ghosts against the backdrop of faded walls. But for Sandra's mother, there was no rush, no sense of urgency. Time seemed to slow, the hands of the clock becoming a cruel reminder of her failure. She sat alone in a plastic chair, her once proud posture now slumped, her face a mask of guilt and despair. Her hands trembled in her lap as she clutched the edges of her worn dress, her eyes vacant and lost. She had always prided herself on making good decisions for her daughter, decisions she believed would secure a future of wealth, status, and comfort. But now that very decision had cost her everything. Her mind replayed the past like an unending loop, the same memories spinning in her hair. Her insistence that Sandra marry Tony, the wealthy businessman from Lekki, the man who could offer her everything she had never had. She had believed that Sandra's happiness would come from the riches he could provide. But now, sitting in that hospital, Sandra was gone, and the wealth that had seemed so essential felt hollow and meaningless. Sandra's mother closed her eyes, a soft sob escaping her chest. She remembered the day she had pushed her daughter to marry Tony. It had seemed so simple at the time. Tony had money, a beautiful house, a future filled with luxury. But love had never been part of the equation. Sandra had tried to explain that she loved Andy, the kind-hearted man from their village, but her mother had been deaf to those pleas. Tony will give you a life of comfort. Don't waste your time on someone who has nothing. Now, the comfort Sandra had been promised lay dead on the cold, sterile bed in a hospital room, surrounded by beeping machines and the sterile smell of death. Sandra's mother could not undo the past. The decision was irreversible. The nurse entered the room, her steps soft and measured, clipboard in hand. She walked over to Tony, who stood near the window, his back to the others, gazing out at the city streets. His face, usually filled with self-assured confidence, was now unreadable, emptied of emotion. The nurse spoke to him in hushed tones, and though her words were too quiet for Sandra's mother to hear, she could tell by the look on Tony's face that the news was grim. Sandra's mother could hardly breathe as she stood up and moved towards the door of Sandra's room. She had been here for hours, trapped in a waiting game that no one should ever have to play. But when she saw the nurse come out, her eyes filled with sorrow, Sandra's mother knew the worst had happened. Her daughter was gone. The room was silent as the nurse walked towards her, her face a mask of professionalism, though Sandra's mother could see the pity in her eyes. Without saying a word, the nurse placed a hand gently on Sandra's mother's shoulder. The quiet words that followed felt like a thunderclap in her chest. Sandra's life support has been turned off. We did everything we could, but her body couldn't handle it. The words echoed in her mind. Sandra was gone. Her daughter, the one she had tried so desperately to protect and guide, was dead. The heaviness in Sandra's mother's chest was suffocating, and the reality of the loss was like a punch to the gut. Outside, Lagos continued as it always did. The market vendors shouted their prices to passing buyers. The cars honked in the constant traffic jams, and the sun blazed down, indifferent to the tragedy that had unfolded inside the hospital walls. Life moved on, leaving Sandra's death as just another fleeting moment in the city's endless rhythm. Tony, too, seemed unaffected by the gravity of the situation. He stared at his phone, his eyes vacant as he checked messages, his posture stiff. He was still in shock, perhaps, but Sandra had been nothing more than a trophy to him, a beautiful object to display for his friends and business partners. She had never been his true love. She had been a means to an end, a way to prove to the world that he had made it. But now, with Sandra gone, Tony was left with only the cold, empty space she had occupied in his life. The guilt gnawed at him, though he refused to acknowledge it. He had never truly cared for Sandra, and yet he couldn't escape the feeling that something essential had been lost. The wealth, the status, the business deals, it all felt meaningless now. It hadn't saved her. It hadn't protected her. And it certainly hadn't brought her happiness. As Sandra's mother walked past Tony without a word, she couldn't help but feel a deep sense of bitterness toward him. He had been the one who had pushed her daughter to stay, who had manipulated her into believing that wealth was the ultimate goal. And now, here they were, standing in a hospital with a life lost because of that pursuit. The truth hit Sandra's mother hard as she left the sterile confines of the hospital and stepped back into the busy streets of Lagos. She had spent her life chasing status, believing that wealth could solve everything. But in the end, it was love, not money, that had been the key to a happy life. And she had robbed her daughter of that. Her feet moved mechanically as she walked through the crowded streets, her mind in turmoil. She couldn't undo the past, but she knew one thing now. Wealth could not replace the importance of love and family. It couldn't heal a broken heart or replace the warmth of a loving touch. No amount of money could bring Sandra back, and no amount of gold could ever make up for the love she had sacrificed. Sandra's death had been the consequence of a mother's misguided choice, a choice to place wealth above love. It was a lesson learned too late, but one that would stay with her for the rest of her life. In her grief, Sandra, Mother made a vow, a promise to herself that she would never again place material gain above the needs of her family. Her daughter's life had been the price of that lesson. And though it was too late to save Sandra, perhaps, just perhaps, it wasn't too late to save others from making the same mistake. In the pursuit of wealth and status, we often forget the things that truly matter: love, family, and connection. No amount of money can replace the warmth of a loving home, the joy of simple pleasures, or the peace that comes from knowing you are loved. It is the people in our lives, not the riches we amass, that give life its meaning. True happiness comes from the heart, not from material gain.